Hi, I'm Tony Holtz from Axiom Compliance Learning, and this video is a resource to help you in your study in inspecting and testing emergency lighting systems. So before we start, I want you to understand the legislative framework that governs inspection and testing of emergency exit lights. So it's important that we understand the jurisdiction and state requirements for licensing. Queensland, for example, require a license to do emergency exit light testing. But in all states, you need to be a licensed electrician to do the maintenance work on some parts of that system. It's really important that you don't put a screwdriver onto an electrical terminal in any state of Australia because that would be deemed to be electrical work. And there are $20,000 fines for individuals doing that type of work who aren't licensed. And there are $120,000 fines for companies who allow people to do that work. So it's really important that you engage the correct trade and the correct qualifications to do any maintenance work in association with emergency exit lights. The rest of the inspect and test system can be done by somebody who is a competent person, and that is what we're trying to achieve by doing this structured, accredited training. And once you've completed that training, you can go ahead and do your emergency exit light testing, but just bear in mind that if you were going to venture into the electrical work and replacing emergency exit lights, if you're doing more than unplugging something from a plug base, you'll require an electrical license. So in accordance with AS 2293.2, our 2019 version, there's a couple of changes that we need to point out. If you've been inspecting and testing emergency lights for quite a while, these will seem like significant changes to you. So listen in and probably come and do the course because there's quite a bit to learn about it. I want to point out mainly the changes around the maintained emergency exit lighting system. So remember, a maintained light is a light that's on all the time. If that light is a LED type of light source, it has a requirement now of a light source life. So LEDs over a period of time, although they last a long time and generally around about 5,000 hours, they start to lose some of their intensity. And because of that, there is now a requirement to measure that light source life. And when you put in a new maintained exit light or emergency light that's on all the time, you've got to record as baseline data this light source life, LSL it's referred to. And that will give us basically an expiry date for maintained emergency and exit lights. So in the event that you don't have that information available and you're inspecting and testing a LED type maintained emergency or exit light, you've got 12 months before that light either needs to be replaced or it needs to be tested for its light source life. And then once it's tested, a new expiry date of the light is established and we move on from there. So this is going to cause some issues, and just as my opinion, this is going to cause some issues from the perspective that lights that seem like they're working fine actually have this new requirement, and our customers are going to come up with this new expense of actually replacing lights that seem to be working quite well. So we need to introduce this to our customers as a new requirement under the 2019 standard, and we need to start to record this light source life into our baseline data. So a couple more changes is the checklist has been put in a format very similar to the AS 1851's format, and we have quite an extensive checklist to go through, which we will cover in the course. And a part of the requirement is also to produce our defect report in the same way as we're doing for our other services. Even if we're just doing emergency light services, we have to give our customer a annual condition report and an annual survey. So there's been 3 new reporting changes to the standard as well, and we'll cover that, as I said, in the course as we go through that. So sit back, enjoy the course. Thank you very much. Okay, so in this video, we're going to inspect and test an emergency exit light system. Before we start the testing of the emergency exit lights, we've got to establish how to activate the time test. And we go to a switchboard, and that in general is the place we're going to find the emergency light test facility. Some installations have an emergency light test function, others don't, and we're going to need to turn off lighting circuits. And the requirement of the standard is that we activate this test for 90 minutes and that the lights will operate independently of the general power supply for 90 minutes under test conditions. We have an emergency light test facility on this switchboard, and in general we just want to look at the test facility itself and make sure it's in pretty good condition, so I don't have any touch points that I can put my finger into. There's no browning of any of the circuit devices indicating that we have loose joints or devices getting hot. And it's labelled correctly. So I have a key activated switch here which has a test mode and a reset mode, and currently it's in the normal mode. So if we see discoloration around the top or the front of any of these devices, it generally indicates that they're getting hot and maybe overloaded. So just check for that and make sure that all of these space coverings are in the facility so that nobody can put their finger in there and touch any live circuits. So before we activate the test facility, we need to do a walk around and check the condition of each light individually to make sure that we have the charge light in the on position, so the light's charging, and in general with an inspection to make sure that they look okay, and then just note those conditions on our database, and then we'll come back and activate the test. Okay, so we've arrived at our first light, and this light is commonly called a Spitfire. In actual fact, it's a recessed emergency light. So an emergency light is different from an exit light. It's designed to light a passageway towards an exit, and it's in the non-maintained condition in its normal state. So non-maintained means that it's off in its normal state. So we should inspect the light and make sure that it's in reasonably good condition, and I'm going to use my trusty pointer to show you that all exit emergency lights should have this symbol on it. It also should have a charging light. Now this light can be red or green, it doesn't matter as long as it's on in its normal state. So it's charging the battery at this point. So these are single point systems, which means that each light has its own battery, and it has a little relay in it that when it senses the general power supply failure, it will come on. And we can test it by pushing this button here, and the light will come on. So that's a part of the inspection requirements. However, if it's not possible to push that button and you need a stick 15 metres long, don't worry about that test, because the emergency light test function will test the light in a sufficient way. So that light looks okay. In addition to that, we've got to make sure that the light's numbered. So remember our recording system. As I'm walking around, I'm recording that light passes the inspection. And this is light number 1, and it's marked light number 1. So we'll move on to our next light, which is another emergency light. It's in the non-maintained state. I call these the frog eyes, but in actual fact, they're an emergency spot. Mounted on the wall, and it has its test button and charge light on the side. It's number 2, and I push the button, it activates the light. It seems to be working fine. Visually it's in good condition, doesn't have any spider webs on it, doesn't have any dust or debris that's going to stop the light from performing a reasonable function for providing light in an emergency. Okay, on to our third light. This is what we call an exit light, and this light should be only above an exit. Exit lights need to be above, directly above a door. They need to be a minimum of 2 metres high and a maximum of 2.7 metres high. And oftentimes you'll see exit lights on chains because we've got glass panels and whatnot above doorways. So that's because they need to be a 2.7 metre maximum height. Great. The other thing is they have a viewing distance, and this particular sign has a viewing distance of 24 metres. that 24M indicates 24 metres. So if I can't view this sign or I can be more than 24 metres away from the sign, I've got to increase the pictorial size and the light and picture will get bigger. Up to 32 metres. And you can get bigger ones than that as well, but generally it's between 24 and 32 metres. So if I'm still got a further distance away, I can put another light in between that light if I need to. Also, I may have a pictorial sign on it with a little arrow. Oftentimes you'll see them with an arrow. So these lights are designed to either indicate an exit, in which case you've just got a running man, or it'll be pointing to an exit, trying to provide an egress path out of the building. Okay, so this light is in the maintained condition, and exit lights in general are maintained. So they provide general light and they kind of stick out a little bit, don't they? So that people can see where the exits are. And they're generally nominated exits. So it might not be an emergency exit, but it is a nominated exit for a building for evacuation purposes. Okay, so it also has a charge light and a test button. And if I push the test button, it'd be difficult to see this one change state. All I can do is see the light, the little charge light go out. But it has changed state and it is now in battery mode. Okay, so remember, 2.4 metres off the ground. You'll see them on chains if you've got a glass panel above the door in supermarkets and so forth, just to get them down to that level where people can see. Because remember, you might be crawling along the ground, gasping for air, trying to find an exit point, and we really must make sure that lights are effectively working for that purpose. So we'll go back to the switchboard, we'll activate the emergency test facility and test our lights. Okay, so we've arrived back at our switchboard to our emergency light test facility, and we're going to activate the test button, and by turning it left we can put it into test mode. But before we do that, remember, what time is it? So I'm noticing the time, and with my memory I'm probably going to write it down somewhere so that I know in 80 minutes time I need to do another walk around to make sure that my lights have lasted for that period of time, because if I miss that opportunity, then I'm going to have to come back another day and I'm going to waste a lot of time. So after I activate the test facility now, I'm going to go and do my other work, which makes me work efficiently, and I'm going to come back and do a walk around in 80 minutes time. So I'll activate the lights and I'll see you in 80 minutes. So the timer indicates a green LED saying it's ready to go. We'll activate the test switch. You'll see the timer's changed state. Okay, so our 80 minutes is up and we need to check the condition of the light after 80 minutes of working on battery. Our first light, number one, our Spitfire or emergency light. The light's still on, which is great. The charging light is in the off position, which means it's in the normal state. For activation, perfect. That light's okay. We'll move to our emergency spot. Once again, blinded by the light, but I can see that the charge light is off and the light is still on. Fantastic. Both those lights will pass the inspection and at this page pass the test. So now we'll move on to our exit light. Exit light is in the on state, charge light is in the off state. Perfect. All three lights pass the inspection and pass the test. So I'd just like to cover, before we finish the video, another scenario where you don't have an emergency test facility on a switchboard, and just cover some points about how you can test emergency lights without an emergency light test facility. And also another form of emergency lights as well, a system that is a solid state system. It's a system that operates on battery all the time, and we just need to understand that those systems exist. We won't be covering them in the video, and they're generally tied into a building maintenance or building management system. In any case, we're going to go back to the switchboard, and I want to demonstrate to you how we can test the emergency light system without the use of emergency light test facility. Some buildings, especially older buildings, don't have an emergency light test facility, and we've got to activate the test by turning off lighting circuits. So we'll move back over to our switchboard, and we'll have a look at how we can activate the lights a second time using a circuit breaker and not an emergency light test facility. Okay, so we're back at our switchboard, and I need you to use your imagination for me and pretend that you don't see this part of the emergency light test facility. So we're going to activate the test function of the emergency lights by turning off a circuit breaker and turning off the general lighting circuit. So it's another way that you can test the emergency light without actually having a test function. Now, this is pretty simple, but this can get complicated. So imagine a larger switchboard with lots of circuits on it, and you've got to determine which circuit's the one to turn off. Now, you don't have to do this yourself. If those circuits aren't marked that they are going to activate the emergency light test, which they should be. Now, we go through this in the course, so make sure that you've studied your course notes before you do this. And in worst case scenario, you don't have to do it. You can get an electrician to come in and do it. You can tell the owner of the facility that you need these circuits marked before you start doing this work. And there's two things you need to do before you turn off any general lighting. Because remember, you could be turning off the computer server, or you could be turning off an important part of the electrical installation. So get it right and don't do it if you're not confident to do it. Okay, so number one, notify everybody in the building that you're going to be turning the lights out, because the general lighting is going to go down. You may have to do this out of hours. You may have to organise a different time to do this test. The second thing is, and what I always do before I turn off any circuit on any switchboard, is take a picture of the switchboard. So I want to know what the state of these circuit breakers are before I turn it off. Because when you go to a switchboard and turn off lighting circuits or turn off any circuit, you get the blame for everything. And so you want to have a little bit of evidence of what you've done. So I've taken a picture of the switchboard. I've notified everybody in the building that the lighting circuit will go down. I don't have a very good marking system even on this. All I've got is a circuit here named M3, but I'm going to assume that this circuit here, which is a lighting circuit breaker, is going to turn off the emergency lights, and we'll give it a crack. I'm going to turn this lighting circuit off. We should see the general lighting go down, and we should see the emergency lighting come on. So here we go. And it worked. Perfect. You should have seen the room go dark. And now if we turn around and look, we still have some light though, which is fortunate, and this is what the emergency lights facility is all about. So the general lighting goes out, the emergency lighting comes on and gives us a clear egress path out of the building. Okay, so I'd just like to make a few more points about the way we activate our emergency light test. So we demonstrated two ways. One way was to use an emergency light test facility, and in this case it's a key operated emergency light test facility. And the second way was to actually turn off a circuit breaker when we don't have the emergency light test facility available to us. So the standard from 2005 onwards actually requires that the test facility, or the way you turn the emergency exit lighting off, is in fact resettable. So automatically resettable. So there's a bit of a difference between what the requirements of AS 2293.1 system design and AS 2293.2, which is test and inspect emergency lights. So test and inspection of emergency lights allows us to be able to turn the light off, the light system off, however we want to do it, whether it be pull a fuse, turn a circuit breaker off, or use an automatic facility. However, if your facility has a design standard or a performance requirement as per the schedule, you must meet that, and more as the industry moves forward, the assessment requirement of the building and the assessor that looks at the overall building compliance is going to be looking at the way the emergency light test facility is working. So a couple of things. First of all, we need to have a key operated emergency light test facility if we don't have it in a locked room or cabinet. Secondly, the test facility needs to be automatically resetting. So we can test it and we can turn it on and off ourselves. However, the requirement is that it's automatically resetting. The other thing to consider also is that we now have survey requirements for emergency exit lighting, and part of the survey requirement is that when you activate the emergency light test, the lights that are in the general area of the particular circuit that the lights relate to must come on. So you can't just have an emergency test light circuit that turns off all of the lights, and in the event that one particular area lighting circuit fails, that particular area doesn't come on because it's waiting on another area to fail. So there's a few requirements in design that we need to consider, and as we move forward, and we've just recently had a standard change in 2019, and I'm just going to go through a few more points of that standard change and some of the things that you need to look at. So in the course, we go through the full checklist of the 2019 standard. It's changed fairly significantly from 2005, and they've brought the emergency light testing more in line with the fire industry than the electrical industry now. So our reporting requirements are very similar to AS 1851, and we need to look at the additional requirements, which we'll go through now.